Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to our /MaliciousCompliance, where people follow exact orders despite the ones they hate. And in today's episode, we've got lazy classmates who thought they could cheat the system, a Karen who picked the wrong employee to argue with, and one OP tells a story that proves why you should always read your lease, especially when dealing with scummy landlords. I hope you enjoyed the stories today, and as always, this voice should only be on the Dark Fluff YouTube channel, nowhere else. Let's dive in. So back in high school, I was in a science class that I did very well in. I was top of the class, and I scored nearly 100% on every test and assignment. The teacher assigned a big group project that would take about a week to complete with a team of 4 students. The groups were randomly assigned, and unfortunately, I was paired up with 3 kids who were barely passing the class. In class, we're given time to make plans together as a group to divide up the work, examine the instructions, schedule times outside of school to meet up, all that stuff. It was at this point my teammates decided to tell me that they weren't going to do any work on the project. I asked why, and they said they knew I really cared about my grade, so they figured I would do it on my own. These guys were so lazy that they were banking on the fact that I wouldn't tank my own grade, so they could benefit off of my hard work when I got a good score on the project. I was pissed, and I said that was unfair. They just dug in, and they said, "Too bad, you either do this project yourself or you can get a 0. So with that, cue malicious compliance. Now, I could have gone to the teacher and he probably would have sorted this out, but a better idea struck me. So I said, fine, you guys win, I'll do what you say. They smiled smugly and they thought that was that. But you see, this one teacher had a policy that at the end of the semester, your lowest grade, excluding finals, would be taken off your record. So if you forgot to turn in one assignment or you did really bad on one test, you got a mulligan so it wouldn't ruin your final grade. I had never done poorly on an assignment all year, so I never needed my mulligan. However, I knew that all of these idiots did. If they got a big fat 0 on a crucial assignment, they would probably fail the class. So I did exactly as they instructed. I did no work on the project all week. I just sat on it and bided my time. At the beginning of the next week, all of the students start turning in their assignments. My team just watched as I sat in my chair unmoving. Finally, my one classmate says, "Hey dude, aren't you gonna turn in the project?" And this is when I said to him, "Oh, I didn't do the project." Cue the stunned faces. They were so shocked and they asked why the hell I didn't do it. To which I responded, "You guys said do all the work or get a 0. I choose 0. They were of course royally pissed, and they all had to repeat the class over the summer. They also hated my guts, but I couldn't have cared less. It was the most satisfying failing grade in my entire life. What a wonderful malicious compliance that was, guys, and it was even sweeter learning that OP's group mates had to redo the class over the summer. Like, that is sweet, sweet karma hitting hard. But seriously, imagine how OP felt when they smugly thought to themselves, I'm gonna get back at these guys. I can afford a 0. I know they can't. And this person comments, I've done this before even without the mulligan. I just ate the 0. I was written up and sent to the principal. The principal said, you'll get a 0. I replied, that's fine, I'll take a 0. I have straight A's in this class, I don't care. He says, go back to class and take your 0 then. I got a 0, and the rest of the group also got a 0. They failed the class, and they had to repeat it because that 0 dropped their already low grades below the cutoff. Meanwhile, I got an A in the class anyways because I aced all the tests. For almost 2 decades, I worked security in office buildings, night shift, so I could work on my novel drafts. At work, in the idle hours between rounds and security duties, I wrote on an iPad, and I'd connected the iPad charger to the electric outlets in my reception desk. My work was basically guarding an empty office after hours. This involved a maximum of 2 hours of actual work, leaving 6 hours to pass time and stay awake. Most of my coworkers filled that time with non-productive activities like watching TV, playing games, filling out crossword puzzles, that kind of stuff. So that said, I had this manager who had a personal problem with me and tried getting me fired. Since I performed my duties above average, he had to find a way to get me on something else. One day, I was called into HQ for a meeting with my manager and a young floozy from HR. It was a stupid meeting. Basically, this young female intern from the Human Resources Department spent the whole meeting flirting with my idiot manager, who is married to the company owner's daughter. Anyways, I was accused of theft, stealing electricity from my laptop. I told them if they wanted to accuse me, they had to do it properly. I hadn't committed theft. I had committed embezzlement since the electricity was part of my reception area and under my supervision. Therefore, embezzlement's a vastly more insidious crime, and they should send me home and gather the disciplinary committee to judge whether I should be fired for this crime, and I would confer with my union rep. They immediately retracted their accusation and they stopped bothering me with their nonsense. All of my colleagues charged their devices from company outlets, so their accusation would mean that every single employee could be arrested for electricity embezzlement. After the meeting, the irate manager hangs up a sign in the security area that no one's allowed to charge their personal devices. So I took a typewriter to work, so I didn't need to charge my writing implements. Also, I had a Nokia that would hold a charge for several days, but my coworkers had smartphones that needed juice, so they got angry at management for the signs about not being able to charge their phones, and that complaint spread to other locations, forcing the management to remove the signs and allow people to charge their phones again. That meant I could hook up my iPad and Bluetooth keyboard again. The funny thing is the whole stealing electricity thing was just a rage bait excuse to provoke me into getting into an emotional outburst with my manager so he could fire me for insubordination. Instead, my response made him escalate to posting signs everywhere that got my coworkers angry with him, which in the end made him hate me even more. I win. Okay, who else thought the typewriter move was absolutely genius? Like, it's just funny to me how OP's boss was so petty over mere pennies of electricity, yet he calls a pointless meeting involving multiple people that literally cost who knows how many dollars per hour. Like, some people just love to power trip, don't they? And I'm just glad to know that everyone thought that guy was an idiot. So bear with me since I'm not a great storyteller, but I thought this one needed to be here. This came up recently during one of our friends' barbecues, and I thought I would share. During halftime at one of the local high school's football games, we went to the concession stand to get some food. Now, I didn't think it would be an issue because we were sitting with a group of people, but I laid my stuff out on the bleachers anyway. However, when we got back, we were met with a group of middle-aged people and a rather elderly lady sitting in our spot and my stuff tossed to the side. Now, usually, I'm an extremely nice person to the point that people are always yelling at me for being too nice and getting taken advantage of. But this week, I'm sick of being taken advantage of and done dealing with people's BS. I just stood there for a minute and then said, this is our seat. You took our seat and that's extremely rude. This is when the leader of the middle-aged ladies, who we'll call Karen, snaps back. And she said to us, they said no one was sitting here, so sorry. She said that, but made absolutely no attempt at moving, to which my husband said, yeah, you really look sorry. Karen then motions behind her, and she said, well, there's room back there. However, there was only one small section of bleacher directly behind her and between our entire group. I thought about it for a second, and then realized that arguing wasn't gonna get us anywhere, and it would just make me look bad. So I just smile to my husband and I say, okay, let's squeeze in here. It was like he could read my mind in that second and he knew exactly what was about to happen. So my husband and I, along with our 4 children, squeezed up right behind and beside Karen. As anyone with kids, or anyone that's ever seen kids, you can probably see where this went. These kids were running on pure sugar, adrenaline, and school spirits after a long first week of school. And I made special sure that the youngest, a 6-year-old boy, sat right next to me, directly behind Karen in her large bleacher chair she had set up. Did I also mention that the reason we were sitting up front is because my kids can't sit still? My kids like getting as close as possible to see the game, but also enjoy coming back to us to sit and talk for a bit. Now, in any other situation, I would have made sure my kids were respectful and courteous of those around us. I would have put a stop to the screaming when our team scored, the jumping up and down chanting with the cheerleaders, the running between us and the fence, but not this night. I think it took Karen all of 5 minutes to realize her mistake. The cringing from the screams right behind her, the leaning from side to side when they were standing at the fence blocking her view, and my 6-year-old happily swinging his feet back and forth, oblivious that he was repeatedly kicking the back of her seat. Karen was getting audibly and visibly annoyed from all of it, and she kept giving me dirty looks as if to say, "Control your kids." I would just shrug and look at my husband and say, "I tried to tell her." One by one, those in Karen's group start to leave. But Karen held on the longest and still only made it half an hour before she decided she couldn't take it anymore and she left. Now, I'm not a complete monster. I made sure my kids didn't bump or bother the elderly lady. And I even asked Karen to move her purse she had put behind her before it got stepped on, but even that was met with a scoff. Maybe next time though, Karen will think twice before stealing seats from kids because she might get more than she bargained for by inviting us to squeeze in behind her. Nothing like getting back at a nasty Karen by weaponizing your own little kiddos, guys. What a win-win situation that was. And in all honesty, her kids probably had the best time ever that day. Totally worth it. And this person comments, "Act like an uncivilized barbarian, get treated like one. You don't get to steal someone's seats and then appeal to norms of polite behavior." And this person says, "In my hometown, this would not have ended well for Karen. It wouldn't even be the people whose stuff she moved. The other people around there would have dealt with her. You do not mess with people's stuff in the football stadium, ever." So I just had the best malicious compliance today, and I thought I would share. Here's some backstory. I moved to the Big Apple from LA, and I signed a lease for an apartment sight unseen. It was the same price as my LA apartment, but in LA, $1,350 gets you a master bedroom with a walk-in closet, private bath, and 3 roommates. In New York City, for $1,350, they've turned my closet into the bathroom, and I now weigh 135 pounds thanks to the 7 flights of stairs I have to walk up every day. Some days, I would raise my arms to put on deodorant and scrape my elbow on the ceiling. One of my 5 roommates was an RN though, so there was the upside. The only saving grace was that this apartment was pet-friendly, and it also had an in-unit washer and dryer. I hated living there, and after 2 months, when my job said I could work remotely, I packed up and went to the Caribbean. While I was there, I won the New York City housing lottery. For the first time in my life, I could afford to live by myself in New York City of all places. I had read in forums that landlords are usually pretty happy for tenants when they win, and they let you out of your lease no problem. So in my optimism, I sent the management company an email letting them know that I won the lottery and I wanted to discuss terminating my lease early. They told me to speak to the brokerage to get my room filled. The brokerage told me that I would need to pay a broker's fee of $1,350 and still pay rent until they filled the unit, or I could try and fill it myself. So I find a guy who is already applying with the broker for another unit and he wants my room. Then management says they want the guy I found to pay $1,400 a month. This is genuinely the worst apartment that I've ever lived in. I don't feel right trying to get someone to pay $1,400 for this room. I'm in a bit of a time crunch as this new guy wants to move in as soon as possible. So I need to hire movers to take my stuff to storage the next day. But if I don't get the approval from management that everything's good to go on their end, then there's no point. So I need management to agree to let this guy take over my lease for the price that's on my lease. I argue that a new price would be a new lease, and if they want to do that, they would have to release me from the lease and market this apartment at this new price point. They refuse, saying that I should pay the broker's fee or forfeit my deposit and continue to pay rent until they get my room rented. Now I'm upset because management basically wants to make more money and assume no risk. I would end up paying until they rent out this awful room to someone. I tell them this is unfair and this makes no sense. And this is when management tells me, well, there's no lease takeover in the lease. I'm confused because I vaguely remember reading something about a $500 fee for a lease takeover. Management then says, read your lease. We were doing you a favor before, but now we're only going by the lease. So I find my lease because I remember there being this $500 clause. I never found the $500 clause because written on the first page of the lease was clause number 2, the length of lease, which says the term of this lease is beginning on so-and-so date, and the ending is at the end of August. And seeing that, I'm elated. My move-in date for my new place is August 25th, so that meant I no longer needed to rush. All because management told me to read my lease. So I give them back a call and I request the email address to send my 30-day notice of intent to vacate, or if it should be mailed as it's not specified in the lease. Management tells me I can't break the lease, and that's when I tell them I'm not, it ends next month. I send them a photo of the first page of the lease. He sputters and says, "You know it's a year-long lease, this is a typo. As you know, I just took over managing the building and I inherited some bad leases." I didn't know this, but I gleefully responded, "Well, I was doing you a favor before, but now I can only go by the lease. If the lease says my term ends next month, I have to honor that." He hangs up furious that this is happening. He calls me back at 8 p.m. and I'm ready to tell him that I'll move out according to the lease. But he starts the conversation in a somber, defeated voice. He says to me, "You can move out on the 31st, we just have to go according to the lease. We'll do a final walkthrough and give you back your deposit." I'm still in the Caribbean, my cousin will be subletting for August, and I'll be moving into my new apartment when I get back. Everything worked out in the end, all because he told me to read my lease. And this is why as a renter, it's very important to actually thoroughly go through the paperwork you're about to sign. And in some cases, it's not a bad idea to even take pictures of the documents, just in case you're dealing with a shady landlord. Again, don't you just love it when people prey on others and have it backfire so hard on them? There's just something about that that puts a huge smile on my face. And what's better than a landlord getting screwed over is when a nasty boss has it happen to them. Listen to this next post. I started working for a nonprofit in 2019, after being a volunteer member since 2000. It was supposed to be temporary for 3 months or so, but the nonprofit dragged their feet in hiring a permanent replacement. I'm also fairly well off. I'm not filthy rich, but I'm debt-free and comfortable. I didn't need the money, so I never billed for my hours after working 15 months full-time. It was supposed to be $25 an hour, but I was willing to work for free if they just found a replacement in a reasonable time. They were pressuring me for an invoice, so I finally invoiced them for 40 hours a week for 15 months, and it was roughly $60,000. They were livid for a number of reasons I didn't understand. They accused me of lying about my hours because I was a new father, and my wife had gone back to work after maternity leave, and there was no way I could have worked that much. When I told them that I had my son in daycare instead of staying home with him, they sarcastically said, "Now you know what it's like to work an actual job like the rest of us." They were mad that I wasn't volunteering my time anymore like I used to, but I insisted I was, and that my billed time was only for the TV bingo fundraiser and not for any other nonprofit activities. They didn't believe me. I tried to tell them that my hours were actually more than I billed for, and my hourly rate is greatly reduced compared to what I normally charge for all the work I was doing. I was doing IT, e-commerce, web design, marketing, HR, operations, bookkeeping, the list goes on and on. But they said they didn't care about the rate reduction. They insisted that I charge my normal rates for my actual hours, and then deduct 10 hours a week for volunteering, which is about 10 times more hours than any of them volunteer for. And I just thought to myself, okay, so I started charging them $40 to $125 per hour depending on the task. I recorded all of my tasks and hours in great detail. I charged for any time I spent doing what normally was volunteer work for the nonprofit. Then, I finally deducted 10 hours a week. I was billing an average of 50 hours a week after the volunteer hours were deducted. I also took the opportunity to start hiring more people under me on their dime, so I could work way less than I did in the first 15 months, but I still get paid the same, if not more. And the thing is, they couldn't say anything because it was exactly what they asked for. I was billing $1,000 a week before malicious compliance, and then about $3,000 a week after malicious compliance. These guys kept doubling down and accusing me of incompetence and fraud over the next year and a half I continued working, but I didn't care anymore. They turned my passion into a crappy job I didn't need. So I stayed until all of my amazing employees were hopefully set up for success, and I wrote that nonprofit out of my life for good. I didn't feel any guilt over being paid for my time with them because I had raised more money for them in 30 months than they had raised in the 100 years before then, which if you're curious was $30 million gross, about $20 million net. So this happened when I was a manager at this pizza delivery store in my town. You know which one, the good one. And let me tell you just a little bit about my town. The town's tiny. It used to be called a city, but in the past few years, they changed it to town. I have no clue why, but if that doesn't scream small rural area, I don't know what does. That being said, the store wasn't all that busy compared to other stores. This left us really slow at night, and all the staff we would need was a closing manager and a closing driver from 8 p.m. on. And to be honest, closing sucks. Anyone that's worked in fast food and closed knows that there's nothing worse than those late night customers and the hassle of getting home at 3 a.m. But that's one thing about this small town store that I loved. It would die down around 8 o'clock and I could slowly close and clean the store, with only leaving the essentials until we actually closed at midnight. This was awesome because it allowed the driver and myself to leave as early as 5 minutes past on a regular basis. Anyone that's worked in delivering food knows where to expect tips and where not to expect tips. Your local Section 8 housing is typically a dry spot. If you walk out with 2 quarters, a dime, and a couple of pennies, consider yourself lucky for that delivery. But there is something very special about our local Section 8. That is the complex police. Ooh, scary. They have this one guy that's suited up and he looks like a legit cop. Except he doesn't have a gun and he has no authority. But they do give him a Jeep that has blue lights and it says apartment police on it. This guy, for whatever reason, has it out for delivery drivers from all the pizza places in town. I know this because we sometimes hired ex-workers from the other stores, and they know him on a first-name basis. If the guy didn't look like he would kidnap a child right after finishing clipping his toenails for his toenail collection, I would potentially hire him because the guy takes his job so seriously. The Section 8 driveway has a few speed bumps, as well as posted 5-mile-per-hour signs that are handwritten, I think, by our cop. One day, my main full-time driver gives me a call in the middle of a shift, and he says that the guys pulled him over for speeding in that complex. My driver says the police wants to talk to the manager, so I get on the phone with him, and he tells me I need to come to the complex and talk with him, as well as write up my employee. I told him I can't leave the store and you can't detain my driver. He knows I'm right, and he says if he catches him again, he will call the cops, to which I respond, okay, with an eye roll. So the day goes on, and the driver and I just laugh it off. The next day, we're working together again as usual, because most of my workers are students that drive part-time and they can't close. So around 8 o'clock, we get this order again for Section 8. Sure enough, 10 minutes go by, and I'm getting a call that my driver's parked in the parking lot to make a delivery. And when he came back out of the apartment, he saw the cop sitting in his car and they made eye contact. The cop immediately pulls behind my driver's car and he's blocked him in. He then said he's detaining him until the real police show up because he's parked without a parking permit. At this point, I think this is an effing joke because he also said yesterday he may or may not have been speeding. The guy definitely doesn't have a radar gun, but just how mad could this guy be? So I tell my driver, just wait for cops and talk to them. Maybe half an hour goes by and my driver gets back to the store to report to me what happened. The cops did not fine him for parking without a permit. They didn't write him up for a speeding ticket, but the cops told the complex police guy that he could ban him from coming back to the property, even if it's for work. So now, we have a written notice to not take delivery orders to the crappiest tipping customers in town, as well as never to be harassed by this D-bag police guy again. And I know I'm hating on how bad of a guy this complex policeman was, but just know that the people in Section 8 housing would always call last minute to order food 5 minutes before closing, and then they would call back to complain so they would get free credit and use it the next night, all without leaving a tip. This was infuriating because we knew that they were abusing the system as well as wasting our driver's time. That being said, with our new permit to F off, when I do get a late night call from Section 8 to ruin our night, I'd have the sweet pleasure of saying, oh, sorry, your complex police has banned our driver from delivering to you. Oh, what's that? You'll just pick it up? I'm sorry, but pickup closes at 10 p.m. Sorry for the inconvenience. Have a nice night. Listen, I'd consider this a win-win situation for OP, almost like they did the pizza place a favor. And being in fast food before, guys, let me tell you, having to bend over backwards for nasty customers like this is no fun at all. And this person says, my first job was at a Subway. We had this woman who would order a meatball sub with a crap ton of marinara. Instead of eating it there, she would drive home, discover her sub was soggy because of all of the marinara, and she would be back at Subway 30 to 45 minutes later with the uneaten sub to exchange it for a new one and bitch at us. She did this at least a half dozen times. So I work for a large electronics company doing sales over the phone. We get a lot of calls daily, and we take credit card details to place orders as well as to place finance orders. Since fraud is such a big deal in our company, we're taught that only the account holder for the credit card or finance account can place an order. Cue Karen calling to place an order for finance. We go through everything, get her name, address, number, and payment details. Just before I place the order, she goes, "Oh, the card's in my dad's name. That's fine, right?" I tell her, no, her dad needs to place the order, as he's the account holder. Cue her arguing for 5 minutes how she's his daughter and I need to finalize this order right now. I tell her I'm sorry, but I can't do that. As I've mentioned, the account holder needs to place the order. Well, she starts cussing me out. She calls me an effing stupid idiot and that I know nothing and demands I place the order. I've had enough at this point, and since she started swearing and getting aggressive, I say to her, I'm sorry, but if you continue to speak to me in such a manner, I will terminate this call. She then says, well, terminate it then. So I did, but not before saying, okay, thank you for calling, have a nice day. I hear her go, no, wait, as I hung up on her. And let me tell you, that felt effing great. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of r/malicious compliance. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy, crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, it's an r/entitled People episode, where psycho Karens are demanding people serve them, and it gets way out of hand. So if you guys missed that one, go check it out, and myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.